I just want to say to my friends in the playground that when I was your age, I dreamt about what you guys are doing. Because when I was a kid, I was at church every Sunday. You had to sit there, you couldn't fidget, and when you fidgeted, it would be pointed out. It was hard being a kid when I was at church, and I'm just so glad for the playground. Amen? Amen. Please pray with me. God of grace, God of hope, God of peace, speak your word of hope in the midst of change. Remind us of the constancy of your love always. And may God's people say, amen. How many of us love change? Just love change. My dad would go into Babe's Truck Stop Restaurant. Now, don't get the wrong idea. Babe was a guy that had served in the Navy, had the hairiest arms I had ever seen as a kid, had tattoos up and down from his time in the Navy, and my dad would go into Babe's every morning, 6 days a week on his way to work. He was a carpenter, and he would always get the same breakfast: a corn muffin, 1 egg scrambled, and a cup of coffee and a small orange juice. The waitress would see my dad pull up. She would order the breakfast for him. He would sit down at the stool. Babe would work up the breakfast, and it would be placed in front of my dad. My dad did not like change. He wanted the comfort of what we knew, of what he knew, but change happens, right? Sometimes it's a great change. We get some good news we didn't expect, and sometimes it's really hard, and we have to adjust. It's been said that the one constant in life is change. It's true, right? Our theme is, in the midst of change, God can still be found. So that's what's going on with Elijah. Elijah the prophet finds himself in a cave. Cave maybe like that. So how did Elijah the prophet find himself hiding out in a cave in the midst of the wilderness? It seems that change had come to Elijah and his countrymen in Israel. King Ahab, the king of the Israelites in the northern kingdom, saw the opportunity for a political military alliance, and so he married the daughter of the king of the Phoenicians, who had a mighty army and had a lot of money. He married the king's daughter, and her name was Jezebel. And part of the deal with King Ahab, the king of the Israelites, in marrying Queen Jezebel was that the god of the Phoenicians, known as Baal, would have equal standing to the god of the Hebrews, which they called Yahweh. So Yahweh, the god of the Israelites, and Baal, the god of the Phoenicians, had equal standing. And that was a bridge too far for Elijah. Because he understood the commandments passed down to Moses that had preceded Elijah: "You shall have no other gods before me. You shall worship no false gods." And so Elijah knew that this sense of alliance between the Phoenicians and King Ahab was wrong. And so the prophets of the god Baal had gathered to show how great their God was, and Elijah shows up, and he humiliates all of the prophets who worship Baal. And Queen Jezebel is so angry, she says that she will have Elijah put to death. And so Elijah flees and finds himself in a cave like this. And he feels like he is all alone, that he has been forgotten. So at the entrance of the cave, Elijah hears a voice that says to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah? What are you doing here?" And Elijah says in verse 10, "I have been very zealous for the Lord, for the Israelites, my own people, have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, killed your prophets with the sword, and I alone am left." Elijah feels abandoned by his own countrymen. He feels abandoned by God. I alone am left. You ever felt alone? You ever have a trust broken? Someone that you feel that you had placed your trust in had broken that trust? Ever felt that you've been abandoned by God, that you're all alone? You ever wake up at 3 a.m. working your worry beads and seeing no hope for tomorrow? That's what's going on with Elijah. I alone am left. It's just me. And they're seeking to do even more to take my life. When I was starting out in ministry, I was an associate pastor in Vallejo, California. I was dating Tricia. I had wavy chestnut hair, 32-inch waist. I looked great. Thank you, Jerry. I looked great. And I got a call from the hospital. I was a volunteer chaplain, and they said that a young guy named Eddie had tried to take his life. And would I come and visit him? I didn't know Eddie, so I went and visited him in the hospital. And Eddie began to tell me about his life. He had served in Vietnam. He said, I saw things and did things that keep me awake at night. He said, I haven't had a good night's sleep in years. And then he told me about other challenges in his life that were so hard. And so he said, I decided to try to take my life. My girlfriend had just broken up with me, and it was just the last straw. And so I began to just tell him about God's grace and God's love, because that's in my job description. That's what chaplains do. And Eddie said no. He got really angry, and he said, get out of my room. And he threw me out of his hospital room. Eddie felt all alone. There was no hope for him. Have you ever felt that way? That there's nowhere to turn, no one to stand with you, that you're all alone? And for Eddie, the concept of God being with him, he couldn't grasp it. He couldn't accept it. It wasn't real. That's what's going on with Elijah in that cave, feeling abandoned. Verse 11, God said, Elijah, go out and stand in the front of the cave before me, for the Lord is about to pass by. And now there was a great wind, but God was not in the wind. And then there was a great earthquake, but God was not in the earthquake. And then there was a great fire, a consuming fire, but God was not in the fire. And after the fire, I love this phrase, a sound of sheer silence. And then Elijah heard it. He wrapped his face in his mantle, and he went out and stood at the entrance to the cave. Then there came a voice, what are you doing here, Elijah? Have you ever heard God's voice? Have you ever sensed God's presence when you're working your worry beads at 3 a.m. and you become exhausted of holding on to the reins of your own life and trying to be so in control, and finally you say, because you can't think of anything else to do, God, help me. God, help me. I don't know what to do. And over time, you have that sense that you're not alone, that there are options and possibilities that previously you weren't aware of. Have you ever sensed God speaking into your life? It wasn't with razzle-dazzle for Elijah. It's not how Elijah expected it, with miracles and mighty feats and rock exploding and earthquakes and fire. But rather, it was in the most humble of manners. In the midst of the silence, paradoxically, Elijah hears God's voice. So I never thought I'd see Eddie again. He had literally thrown me out of his room. And I got a call a few weeks later. And it was from the hospital saying that Eddie was about to be released. And he asked to see me. And so I went to see Eddie. And he said, I've been thinking about what you said about God's grace and God's love. And he said, I began to wonder, what if it were true? What if there were hope for someone like me? What if there was a place for someone like me? And he said, could I come and visit you at church some Sunday? And I said, of course. And he had a lot of bandages. I will not go into detail of how he acquired those bandages. But he said, should I wait until I'm healed? Until the bandages are off my face and my hands and my arms? And I said, one of the things I've learned about life is that we all carry wounds. Eddie, we all carry hurts. And we find healing in the company of one another. And we find healing in company with God. Now, that was a long time ago. I no longer have wavy, chestnut, curly hair. It's been a few months since I had a 32-inch waist. But 30 or so years later, the last I heard, which was just a few years ago, Eddie still teaches Sunday school on Sonoma Boulevard at the First Baptist Church in Vallejo, California. A place where people deal, where, as I said when I was a young person, the ladies of the evening literally work off the front steps of the church. Still that kind of neighborhood. And for 30 or so years, Eddie has been leading Bible studies, going to meetings at AA or NA, offering a healing presence, offering healing that comes out of his own woundedness, his own brokenness. It's a beautiful sight to behold, to be in the presence of Eddie, to see what God can do, the healing that is brought. Back to Elijah in the cave. Verse 18, God says to Elijah, Elijah, you're not alone. Verse 18, there are 7,000 others like you in Israel who have not knelt down to Baal, who have not kissed the false god. There are 7,000 others like you. You're not alone. In the midst of change that comes to all of us, happy change sometimes, painful change beyond our control, the one constant is that God is with us, God walks with us, and God even carries us at times. This is the good news. Thanks be to God. And may God's people say,